You wake up feeling wrong. Not sick enough to panic, just enough to notice. Your throat feels rough. Your body feels heavier than usual. Maybe a headache, maybe nothing. So you do what humans do now. You walk into the kitchen, open a cabinet, take a small white pill, drink water. And within seconds your brain already starts moving on. You'll answer messages, go to work, continue your day, no fear, no ceremony, no real thought. But that might be one of the strangest things humans have ever normalized. Because for almost all of human history this moment didn't exist. No cabinet, no lab, no pharmacy, no doctor telling you what was wrong, just your body. And a question. Will this pass, or is this the sickness that finally kills me? That should have been enough to erase us. For hundreds of thousands of years infection existed. Parasites existed. Fevers existed, children got sick. People got injured. And nobody understood bacteria. Nobody understood viruses. Nobody even knew what sickness was. So something doesn't make sense. Because ancient humans should have disappeared. But they didn't, you're here. Which means they discovered something long before medicine existed. And here's the strange part, the first medicine may not have been medicine at all. You probably imagine ancient sickness in a simple way. Someone gets sick, nobody knows what to do, they die. That feels logical. Primitive world, primitive outcomes, except there's a problem. If that were true, you shouldn't exist. Your family shouldn't exist. Humanity should have disappeared long before cities, long before farming, long before history. Because sickness wasn't rare, it was normal. A small cut could become fatal. A stomach infection could spread through a group. A fever could last days. A child getting sick wasn't unusual. It was expected. And ancient humans weren't surviving in comfortable houses. They were moving, sleeping outside, sharing food, sharing water, sharing everything, which should have made disease worse. So why didn't sickness erase us? And the answer isn't what most people imagine. Because ancient humans didn't survive by becoming tougher. They survived by becoming dependent. Not on medicine, on each other. In northern Iraq, archaeologists found something that shouldn't exist, the remains of a Neanderthal man. Nothing unusual about that, until they looked closer. He had lived much longer than expected. But age wasn't the strange part, his body was. One arm was missing. His joints showed years of severe damage. His vision may have been partially gone. By modern logic, he should have died long before. He couldn't hunt normally, he couldn't move normally, he couldn't survive alone. And yet he did. Not for days, not for weeks, for years, which means something uncomfortable. Someone fed him. Someone waited for him. Someone slowed down for him. Someone kept him alive. And suddenly the story changes. Because maybe the oldest form of healthcare wasn't treatment. Maybe it was simply refusing to leave. But that creates another question. If humans learned to survive sickness together, what happened when caring wasn't enough? Imagine someone in your group develops a fever. They're sweating, shivering, too weak to walk. You don't know what infection is. You don't know what viruses are. You don't even know what a body is doing when it gets sick. You only know something much smaller. Last time someone survived. And they did something different. Maybe they rested near the fire. Maybe they drank something bitter. Maybe they chewed a certain leaf. Maybe somebody remembered. That's where medicine may have actually started. Not understanding, pattern recognition. Ancient humans lived inside one giant experiment. Someone gets sick. Someone tries something. Most of the time nothing changes. Sometimes the person dies. But occasionally they don't. And that changes everything. Because now the tribe remembers. And once people remember, knowledge becomes stronger than the person who discovered it. That sounds obvious now. But imagine how strange that is. Humans were creating medicine thousands of years before they knew what medicine was. No laboratories. No clinical trials. No words for bacteria. Just observation. Repeat, remember. One of the strangest examples comes from a man who died more than 5,000 years ago. His body was found frozen high in the Alps. When researchers looked at what he carried, they expected tools, food, weapons. Instead, they found pieces of fungus tied carefully to a cord. At first, nobody understood why. Then modern analysis suggested the fungus contained compounds with medicinal properties, which raises a strange possibility. This man may have been carrying treatment, not because he understood chemistry, but because somewhere someone had already discovered. This helps. And suddenly something feels familiar. Because that's still how medicine works. You try, you observe. You keep what works, you pass it forward. The difference is today the experiments happen behind white walls. Back then they happened around a fire. But here's where things become uncomfortable. Because plants only work sometimes. And sickness doesn't always wait. So what do humans do when memory isn't enough? Imagine you've tried everything: the bitter leaves, the warm fire, rest, waiting. Stories from older people, and nothing changes. The fever stays. The pain gets worse. The person doesn't get up. Now imagine making a decision without understanding what disease is. This is where ancient humans become difficult to recognize, because they didn't just accept sickness. Sometimes they fought back, in ways that sound impossible. Archaeologists have found ancient skulls with clean openings cut into them. Not damage, not accidents, deliberate holes, made by human hands. Think about how strange that is. Someone looked at another person's suffering and decided, maybe the problem is inside. And instead of waiting, they opened the skull. With stone tools, no scans. No explanation. And here's the part nobody expects. Some of those people survived. You can still see signs of healing in the bone. Meaning this wasn't random. This wasn't panic. People knew enough to try. That doesn't mean they understood the brain. It means they understood something older. Action. Human beings have always hated helplessness. If something hurts, we do something, even before we know why. And suddenly ancient medicine starts looking less primitive. Not because it was scientifically correct, but because it followed the same instinct modern medicine still follows. Observe, intervene, learn, try again. But surgery creates another problem, because cutting isn't knowledge. Knowing when to cut, that's knowledge. Knowing which plant to trust, which fever to leave alone, which person might survive. That knowledge had to live somewhere. And for most of human history, it lived inside one person. Not the strongest hunter, not the leader, the person who remembered, the healer. The one people walked toward when the body stopped making sense. And that's where medicine changes again. Because maybe medicine was never really about curing people. Maybe it was about preserving memory long enough for the next person to survive. You probably think medicine began the moment humans understood disease. That sounds reasonable. First, people discovered germs. Then they created medicine. Then survival improved. Except that isn't what happened. Humans were treating sickness long before they knew what sickness was, which means something strange. Understanding came later. Survival came first. Think about fever today. You feel hot. You take something to bring the temperature down. It feels obvious. Lower the fever. Fix the problem. But fever isn't always the problem. A fever is often your body doing something on purpose, raising temperature, changing behavior, slowing you down, forcing rest, turning your entire body into a place some pathogens struggle to survive. Ancient humans didn't know any of that. But they noticed something. People with fever didn't always need movement. They needed warmth, rest, time. The body was already doing something. Humans just learned not to interrupt it. And suddenly medicine stops looking like invention. It starts looking like translation. Your ancestors didn't know immune systems, but they knew patterns. They knew this person survived, this person didn't, this helped, this didn't. And over thousands of years, those observations became traditions. Those traditions became practices. Those practices became medicine. And eventually science arrived. Not to replace all of it, but to explain it. That's the strange thing. The white pill in your cabinet feels modern. But underneath the chemistry, it's still the same human process. Observe, keep what works, pass it on. The walls changed. The language changed. The tools changed. But the behavior didn't. And maybe that's why getting sick still doesn't feel mechanical. Because even now, when your body starts failing, you don't just want treatment. You want someone to know. Which raises a strange question. If medicine became better, why does sickness still make us feel so human? Think about what happens the next time you get sick. Not seriously sick. Just enough to cancel plans, enough to stay in bed, enough to feel different. Watch what changes. You answer messages slower. Food becomes less important. You want quiet. You want warmth. You want someone to ask, "How are you feeling?" And that's strange. Because modern medicine has become incredibly good. You can order medicine, book appointments, get diagnosed, see inside the body. We understand disease more than any humans in history. And still, when you feel sick, part of you wants something much older. Not information. Presence. Not explanation, attention. Not because attention cures illness, but because for most of human history, sickness wasn't private. It couldn't be. You didn't disappear into another room. You didn't text people updates. You got sick in the middle of everyone. People saw it. People reacted. People adjusted. Someone gave up food. Someone sat nearby. Someone waited. And your body grew up inside that reality. Which means something unexpected. Feeling cared for when you're sick may not just be emotional. It may feel necessary because for most of human history it was. For hundreds of thousands of years, being sick alone was dangerous. Being sick near people increased your chances. So maybe your body still expects that. Maybe that's why being ill can feel lonely in a way other discomfort doesn't. Maybe that's why even adults still say things like, "I just want to go home," not because home always heals, but because home means something older. Protection, being watched. Someone else carrying part of the risk, and maybe that's the strangest thing. After everything humans built, hospitals, medicine, science, technology, the thing that still feels healing looks surprisingly ancient. Someone notices, someone stays, someone says, "Get some rest, I'll take care of things," and suddenly you feel a little better. Not because the sickness disappeared, but because your body remembers something your mind forgot. For most of human history, survival was never something you did alone. Maybe that's why sickness still feels different from every other problem. You can be stressed alone, you can be sad alone, you can be tired alone, but being sick feels strange. Because sickness turns you back into something older. You stop planning, you stop performing, you stop pretending you're independent, and for a moment you become human in a way modern life doesn't usually allow. You rest. You let other people see that you're not okay, and that's not weakness. That may be one of the oldest survival behaviors we still have. Because for hundreds of thousands of years the body learned something simple. When you are vulnerable, move closer, not farther. Maybe that's why care feels disproportionately powerful. Why soup taste is different when someone makes it for you. Why a text message matters more when you're sick. Why being alone feels heavier. Not because humans forgot how to survive, but because humans never evolved to survive that way. And maybe every time you take medicine, you're participating in something much older than science. Not just chemistry, not just treatment, a chain. Someone noticed something, someone remembered, someone stayed alive, someone passed it on, and eventually that knowledge reached you. Inside a bottle, inside a hospital, inside a tiny white pill. But underneath all of it, the system never really changed. A human body, another human being, and enough time to learn. Maybe we didn't survive sickness because we defeated nature. Maybe we survived because every generation kept leaving clues for the next one. And maybe medicine was never humanity escaping being human. Maybe it was humanity remembering that nobody survives alone. If this made you notice something you've lived with your whole life, subscribe to You Never Noticed. Because the strangest parts of being human are usually the things we stop seeing.